Hi, and welcome to the Experiment Manager tutorial. My name is Jeff Cracker, and I'm a Senior Application Scientist at Cytobank. Today we're going to be talking about Cytobank's Experiment Manager view. First, we'll cover the basics of the manager, how to sort and organize using the manager, talk about filters, labels, and also the inbox and how that works. Next, we'll look at the expanded detail view that's present now from the Experiment Manager. And then also we'll talk about linked experiments, how the relationship tree works, and the behavior of deleting experiments. So let's hop into the software. This is how the new Experiment Manager appears. At the top, you'll see recent analysis tasks that you've undertaken. So in this case, I've generated a VISNI run, and it shows up right here. So this is a shortcut to the most recent advanced analyses that you've done. Below that is the inbox. So these are experiments that have been shared with your account that you haven't looked at yet. So if somebody has just recently given you access to one of their experiments, you can see those experiments here in your inbox. And then below that are all of the experiments that you have access to by default. So right here you can see I have some experiments. My colleague Angela has shared some experiments with me and also has some public experiments. If I want to change what these filters are, I can click on these shortcuts over here. So I can see, for instance, just my experiments, or just experiments shared with me. However, there are more detailed views that you can choose here. You could choose just experiments from an individual person, or just experiments with individual analyses, or with individual labels. And if one of these happens to be your favorite, for instance, if you want to see only experiments with FlowSum all the time and be able to get back to this filter quickly, you can star this filter and make it show up in this top list. So now that I've starred this filter, whenever I log back into Cytobank and view the Experiment Manager, I can quickly click on this to show me only my experiments with FlowSum. From here we can choose other different filters. In this case, for instance, we could maybe click on a label. You can see here I've labeled experiments with these important or demo dataset labels. If you want to see how to do this, you can select an experiment that you own up here and say apply label, and you can choose either make a new one or choose an existing one. If I wanted to see all of my important labels, I could click on those and now see only the ones that have important on them. And labels are only visible to your account. If you put a label on something, nobody else can see that, but you can use it to organize your Experiment Manager. You can also change the color of each label. You can always rename the label if you want to, so it's a very flexible way to organize your Experiment Manager. So from here, we can choose to make our important labels also show up all the time now from our filter options. And now we can access, again, only those with important labels. If we go back and view all of our experiments, we can choose to see what we're filtering by. So in this case, we're looking at the experiment names, how many files are in the experiment, the primary researcher name when it was created and updated, but you can select different settings for what we're looking at here. So if we wanted to see the number of illustrations, for instance, I can add that in. If I wanted to remove the number of FCS files in the primary researcher and just look at the number of VISNI analyses, I could do that as well. So feel free to pick and choose which of these options you'd like to use to label your experiments by. And then you can use this search bar up here to search for the experiment name. So now I'm just looking at things with PBMC in the name. Or I could look for things with just my first name as the primary researcher. So there's a lot of options to be able to search and organize your Experiment Manager. Once you find an experiment you're interested in, you can click on that experiment and you're brought to the experiment details page. So here it's basically an advanced details page showing you all the different attributes of this experiment. You can see who has access to it, how many saved illustrations, how many populations there are, how many FlowSum, VISNI, FCS files there are, if there are any attachments, and then a diagram of the linked experiments. We'll talk about this in a little bit. But this is actually a very in-depth kind of advanced analysis view. If you wanted to just really quickly see what different populations there are, You can click on the populations and see them reflected on this set of channels here. So let's pick, for instance, 19 versus 4, and 19 positive, 4 negative. That's comforting for B cells. So you can go down and actually see what each of these populations are on the two axes. If you want, you can go scroll further down and see which linked experiments there are, and we'll talk about this again in just a moment. But this basically advanced details page allows you to get a really good overview of what's inside the experiment before moving further in the experiment summary or the working illustrations, maybe hop directly into gating or any of these other options. You can kick all of these things off right from this kind of advanced details page. So if we'd like to see a little bit more about an experiment with advanced data sets in it, those experiments from those advanced data sets show up as linked experiments. And so you can see that here. So there are 6 results from an algorithm attached to this experiment. And there are 2 other linked experiments. And you can either manually link experiments, or if you make a clone of an experiment, it automatically becomes linked. So now you can see, if you want, what's going on in this experiment by clicking on it and going to the experiment summary page. The experiment summary page gives you a little bit more graphical representation of the relationship of this experiment to all of its linked sub-experiments. So here you can see it was cloned from this one. We've run a VISNI on it and then a FlowSOM on that VISNI. We ran a FlowSOM just by itself. We did another clone, and a clone from that, a VISNI on that, and then 2 FlowSOMs on that VISNI. So you can see this relational tree here and all of the different experiments that are linked to this one. So from this experiment, if we were to go to, for instance, the VISNI result, like we have now, you can see the details of this VISNI experiment. You can come up here and see what the relationships are of this experiment. Now we're in this one, and then edit those relationships if you want to. So we can edit this experiment. We can unlink it from its parents if we chose to. We can also go back and interact with other pieces of this relational tree. So for instance, we could hop over into this clone. Now we're in this experiment, and we can come over and see, we could unlink this one if we wanted to. If you delete an experiment that has linked experiments, if they're advanced analyses, they'll automatically get deleted also, unless you manually unlink them first. And again, you can do that by going to that sub-experiment, going up to Actions, saying Edit Linked Parent, and then Unlink. And that will basically move this experiment and any ones beneath it to their own experiment in your experiment manager. And you won't have to worry about deleting them if you were to delete the parent. What this enables you to do is it enables you to run advanced algorithms on the results of other advanced algorithms, for instance, FlowSOM on a VISNI result, without having to clone it to promote it to its own experiment in your inbox. Because you can visualize these relationships now you can just directly go and create as many of these analyses on the results of previous algorithms as you want. You don't have to worry about being confused about which one comes from which other experiment. So that's how the linking works. So again, we covered the experiment manager layout, how to sort and organize, the different filters and labels you can use, how the inbox works when somebody shares a new experiment with you, the expanded detail view, so you can see kind of a much more in-depth view of an experiment before you actually hop into editing that experiment. And then linked experiments, how they are related to each other and how the deleting behavior works. If you have advanced algorithm results from one experiment and you delete that experiment, they also get deleted unless you manually unlink them. And with that, thank you for your time. If you have any more questions, please visit support.cytobank.org and you can engage with our written material there.